Hey folks, this is Kalani. The new Dragonflight expansion will be introducing some huge, sweeping changes to the entire game. We have a brand new talent system, classes are changing the most they arguably ever have, professions will see a massive overhaul, and there's brand new tech being implemented to fuel things like dragon riding. But everyone knows about those changes, that's the big stuff, the key expansion selling points. But there are some very interesting and quite important smaller changes that might have slipped through the cracks. So in this video we're going to go over 20 lesser known Dragonflight changes you absolutely need to know about. Before we jump in, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another video. To kick things off, one of the most impactful smaller features being added in Dragonflight that you might not know about is that mob tagging is no longer faction specific. Mob tagging itself has evolved quite a few times over the years, and if you played Classic Wrath recently, it might have been a bit of a rude awakening, but back in the day you could not get credit for a kill in terms of experience and loot if someone who was not in your group hit that mob first. Eventually we got to the point where anyone could get credit even if you weren't in a group up to a cap, but there was still one main restriction in place. If someone from the opposite faction hit a monster first, they would tag it and you couldn't get credit. That seems to have changed in Dragonflight. You can share credit with members of the opposite faction. There's almost zero tagging in the open world to worry about now, unless there are a bunch of folks in the exact same spot. It was super weird to see this for the first time and kind of confusing, but with the faction lines being blurred bit by bit and with cross-faction grouping now in the game, I think it makes sense. This also means you can pseudo-quest with players of the opposite faction. You won't necessarily share progress, but you won't hinder each other quite as much as you normally would. All in all, it's great for outdoor content and it's a nice quality of life change. Another pretty huge change is to something that I don't think has ever been changed in game, or at least I can't remember it ever changing before. Resurrection sickness is no longer going to last for 10 minutes, it's only going to be for 1, so you won't have to sit around for 10 minutes with a massive stat debuff not being able to kill anything until it has run its course. It's only going to be 1 minute, which is basically just a flight path at this point, so you can get back into the action almost right away. There is a downside to this change though. The durability loss incurred when you were above level 10 has been increased up to 50% of your total durability. So if you ever find yourself in a pickle and you need to res your spirit healer, you won't have 10 minutes of being worthless, but you will absolutely tank your gear's durability. Thankfully, most of us probably have a vendor mount by now, but this slides quite nicely into our next feature. Now before we continue, today's video is sponsored by NordVPN. Using public Wi-Fi networks exposes you to the dangers of data breaches and malware infections, and your personal data in the wrong hands can leave long-term consequences. NordVPN and its latest feature, Threat Protection, will cover your identity, shield your privacy, block trackers, and malicious intrusive ads. Get rid of threats and step up your cybersecurity without falling behind in speed or responsiveness. Once enabled from the NordVPN app settings, you can finally enjoy your online freedom on up to 6 devices, plus you can change your virtual locations with no data login in over 60 countries. It's one of the easiest ways to overcome blocked online content, whether it's a website or a streaming service that might be unavailable in your country. NordVPN ticks virtually every single box you can imagine, and it's compatible with most operating systems including Windows, macOS, Linux, iOS, and Android. Go to nordvpn.com/Kalani or click the link in the description to get an exclusive discount on the 2-year plan plus 4 months free. It's risk-free with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. Now, where were we? Oh yes, Dragonflight is going to introduce a new item that allows you to repair your own gear. If you're a blacksmith anyway, these hammers can be made very early and are relatively cheap. So instead of forking over gold at a repair vendor to fix up your broken kit, you can carry around a little pile of hammers to be able to repair your gear whenever you want. It's a slight difference, but at least you won't have to seek out a repair vendor or rely on a vendor mount to get your stuff repaired. It's probably going to be great for raids and dungeons, and we won't have to rely on someone having repair bots either. As a quick note, blacksmiths can create a permanent reusable repair hammer as well later on, so they get it even better. Now this next one is a bit strange, but it will change how almost everyone plays at endgame, and it is going to be incredibly important. World quests seem to have a much longer timer than they previously have. Every world quest that popped up on beta has had around a 3 to 4 day timer, so we get about 2 sets of world quests per week. If this doesn't change by the time the game goes live, we will only have a handful of world quests to complete each week, and remember, the release date has already been announced. We will see release candidate builds before too long, and there also isn't really any reason to have longer world quest timers if testing was the main purpose here. So what we see on the beta is probably what we will get on release, including these long duration world quests. That changes world quests from a daily or semi-daily activity into something you can spread out much further. That's going to massively change how people approach world quests, and it's also going to give you way more freedom when deciding when to actually do them. Instead of checking your map every day to see if anything good or interesting is available, now you only have to check a couple times per week, and you can spend longer getting them done little by little. There are plenty of other things to do with your time at endgame in Dragonflight, so I'm actually happy that world quests will take up a proportionally smaller chunk of time. Speaking of time, there is another small addition to the game which could hopefully save you time by providing you with some timers. If you chat to one of the NPCs near the boarding location for the boat or zeppelin that takes you over to the Dragon Isles, you can enable a little timer above their head. This counts down to when the next ship will arrive, so you don't have to guess anymore. You can see if you have time to quickly go AFK or tab out of the game, or if the boat is almost here so you need to pay attention. This is arguably more valuable for the Alliance side though, because the dock where the new Dragon Isles boat comes in is actually shared. If you get on the wrong boat, you're going to end up in a very different place from what you intended. So this timer not only tells you how long you have left before the right boat arrives, it also gives you an easy check to make sure you're actually getting on the right boat. Now this timer only seems to be available for the new rides over to the Dragon Isle, so the new boat for the Alliance as well as the new super awesome gunship Zeppelin for the Horde. Any other boats or Zeppelins that go to other areas of the game do not have this extra functionality sadly, though now that the idea is in game, maybe some of those older travel options could get updated at a later date. Moving on, you've probably heard that Dragonflight will be changing the talent system around. At least I hope you've heard that by now. It's one of the largest features coming in the Dragonflight expansion, but with so many talents to pick from, it's going to be easy to get overwhelmed, especially when you're seeing and playing around with it for the first time. That's where starter talent builds come into play. Starter talent builds are exactly what they sound like, a setup for you to pick which will auto-populate your talent with some decent choices so you can get straight into questing and mob killing instead of sitting around playing with talent calculators. It's not for everyone. I know a lot of people have a lot of fun playing around with talent builds and setups, but the starter talents will give you a strong base to work off of, so you aren't starting from scratch. Every class and spec will have a set of starter talents when the game launches, so everyone will have that option for a quick play mode almost, and I think it's a neat little extra feature the dev team didn't have to include, but it's nice that they did. Now if you want to try out some other builds, perhaps one of the most interesting changes for the talent system is the ability to export and import your talent setups. So you can save your favorite loadout, export it, and send that over to a friend. You don't have to talk them through the build point by point, you can just give them the import link and boom, they have your talents ready to test out and critique. This is also going to be great for players who just want a build to get started that isn't the starter build. You can go to one of your usual class guide websites or discords and see if they have any talent setup imports for you to copy. It's going to make trying different builds much faster, you can share your builds much easier, and overall it's just a fantastic feature to be included alongside the huge talent system overhaul. Another fantastic option that you have with talent loadouts is that you can save your action bar layouts to specific talent setups. This will initially take a bit longer to organize and set up, but when it's done it will save you so much time in the long run. Imagine you have a single target build, you're probably not going to take your AoE options in the talent tree, which means those abilities don't need to be on your action bars taking up valuable key bindings, but you're going to want an AoE build when you head into other types of content, which means you're going to drop or lose some single target abilities and talents to make room for the AoE ones, right? Well, with this new option you can set up your action bars and have all of your abilities with their positions saved in place. So when you swap to the single target setup, everything is right where you need it and want it for single target, and then when you swap to AoE, everything is in place for that build and setup. You don't have to drag abilities abilities around, or make sure you have your AoE abilities on your bar, or go digging in your spellbook. Maybe you even change the position of defensives or cooldowns depending on situations. Any changes you might make to your action bars or keybinds can be saved to individual talent sets, so you only have to swap your talents and you're ready to go. That is a great quality of life change in my opinion. Now, one thing you may not have noticed in the talent system is the new search bar. This is going to end up being very useful. You can search specific talents, so if someone asks you why you aren't running a talent for a certain situation, you can search for it directly and find out where it is in your tree and what it would take to change things up to get over to that point. You can also search for any of your abilities, and the search results will highlight any talents that affect or interact with that ability. So if you search Arcane Shot as a marksmanship hunter, you can find every talent that will synergize with Arcane Shot, so you can build the best Arcane Shot focus build you can if that's something you want to try out. Just having the search option can save you a lot of time, and it's a nice addition considering these large talent trees are going to be new to pretty much everyone when the game goes live. Speaking of quality of life and accessibility, you've probably seen the new dragon riding feature coming in Dragonflight. It's fast-paced, it's momentum-based, and it's going to test your reactions in some cases. That sounds incredibly fun on one side, but it might also make you worry whether you can keep up or not. It's not quite as simple as pointing in the direction you want to go, and you can't exactly follow someone if that's something you need to do. Now, something you might not know is that there is a ride-along option for dragon riding. Anyone can talk to a dragon riding trainer and ask to allow allies to fly alongside them. This essentially turns your dragon riding drake into a two-seater mount, and your friends can hop on and follow as a whelp. So wherever you go, they go too. This means everyone can tag along as long as you have a friend to help you, so whether you're trying to get up to a high place and can't quite manage it, whether you struggle with dragon riding in general, or if you have other reasons to need to follow along with a friend, the ride-along feature makes sure no one gets left behind. Now, you should also know by now that Dragonflight will be introducing a huge user interface overhaul in the new expansion. That's not really a lesser known feature, or at least it shouldn't be, but along with the big overhaul, the options menu has also changed quite considerably. You can see how much just by comparing the live version to the beta version. A lot of options have been shifted around, they're under different headers, or they've just been moved completely into the new edit mode for the UI. The change around itself is interesting, but the main point I want to highlight is a new search function. This search bar lets you find whatever settings you're looking for without, well, looking for them. Want to find a certain graphic setting? Just search for it. Want to change your empowered spell options, or how names are displayed, or how loot works, or sticky targeting, or any of the new options we're about to go over? Searching is the fastest way to get to what you want, and it actually seems to work pretty well. You can even search for a specific keybind to see what that keybind is currently assigned to. It's a very nice quality of life feature, and it makes it much easier to navigate the whole "we moved everything around" part of this user interface overhaul. Now, there are some new options in these menus for Dragonflight. One of the more interesting ones is press and hold combat. If you turn this on, you can hold down a keybind to repeatedly cast that ability instead of having to spam your button over and over again. So if you have a high spam class or spec like Arcane Mage with their almost constant Arcane Blast spam, or really any caster with any of their filler abilities, you can just hold down one button and the cast will continue over and over again until you run out of mana or stop holding the key. This could be useful for all sorts of reasons, from accessibility issues, joint problems, good old simple laziness. Whatever the reason, having the option to not spam your keys is a nice addition. Another new option that can change how you approach combat in Dragonflight is the action targeting feature. This one is a bit strange, but when you get used to it, it can be really fun. When you turn this on, your character will automatically soft target any creature in front of you. You can then use keybinds and abilities as if you were targeting that mob, but if you move your camera around, you can change your target simply based upon where your character is facing. This could be great for melee characters, some lazy questing or adventuring, or it could even be a huge quality of life update for controller users. I know WoW isn't really designed with controllers in mind, but there have been many changes, this one included, which give better support for controller use nonetheless. It doesn't stop there though, there's another very interesting option that can change how interacting with NPCs and objects works. It's kind of the same thing as combat targeting, but for interactable purposes. If you turn the setting on, enable interact key, you can set a key binding that will let you run up to an NPC or object and press that key to interact. So you basically don't have to use your mouse, which means you don't have to find an NPC to click on or find the quest object to use, and not having to use a mouse also makes controller use even better. So yet another change that could make controller use a bit more viable for all types of content. Another very useful feature that should probably have been added into the game a long time ago is the option to combine all of your bags into a single huge backpack visual. I know there are countless add-ons that do this for you and also add in additional functionality to the bag system, so having this option in game baseline might give you an opportunity to drop at least one add-on off of your long add-on list. Another huge change in Dragonflight related to your bags is that we will actually be given another bag slot to use. This new bag slot is quite special, however, because you will only be able to slot a reagent specific bag in there, so you can't just plop down any old bag in there and max out your bag space. It's going to be specifically for reagents, which is actually amazing because we are going to be carrying around a whole horde of profession related materials in Dragonflight. The profession overhaul is no joke, and with different items having multiple quality levels, our bags will probably fill up quite quickly, but with a special profession specific bag we can keep all of our ore and herbs and whatever else contained to that bag to save up our normal bag space for other items we're most likely going to be hoarding. The size of these profession bags does seem to follow along the same line of normal bags, so we have 32 slot and 34 slot bags to work with, but I think this also opens up some interesting possibilities for the future. The dev team can add in a huge profession bag if they wanted to without throwing the other inventory sections out of whack. Now, another fun addition to the bag system in Dragonflight is that you can track far more currencies on your bag interface itself. On live servers we are currently limited to just 3 currencies being tracked, but in Dragonflight that has increased up to 8. Now hopefully we don't end up with 8 important currencies that we need to track throughout the entire expansion, but just in case we do, or if there are some older currencies you want to track, you can track up to 8 on your bag interface with a new baseline UI, so that's nice. Moving on, we have some very interesting changes for the raids in Dragonflight. To start with, the item levels you can expect to earn from bosses throughout a raid has changed a little bit. In previous raids it became quite common for the last couple of bosses to drop better loot when compared to the first, larger sections of the raid. Well, Dragonflight is taking that one step further and adding in additional step-ups in item level. Let's take normal as an example. The first 4 bosses drop item level 389 gear, the next 2 bosses drop item level 395 gear, and the last 2 bosses drop item level 398 gear. So there's a 9 item level increase just by working through to the later bosses on normal, but those item levels also lead into heroic quite nicely because the first bosses on heroic drop item level 402, just 3 item levels higher than the last bosses on normal, so there's a much smoother transition from the end of normal to the start of heroic, and then also from the end of heroic to the start of mythic. I think this is going to be quite interesting, and it could help players progress at a better pace because as you work through a raid you're going to get better and better gear. Now there is one more change tied in here. Certain bosses have special item drops that are a higher item level when compared to their usual loot. Let's use the normal numbers again. For example, the first boss drops item level 389 gear usually, but then also drops an item level 395 ring. The Primal Council also drops 389 gear, but can drop a 395 trinket. This actually goes all the way up to the last boss, who usually drops item level 398 gear, but also has an item level 405 bow. So hunters are going to have one of the best or highest item level weapons in this first tier of raiding, which is quite exciting. Now not every boss has a special item, but most of them do, so that's going to be quite a surprise when they drop for the first time. Sadly, that does add in a bit of an element of RNG, but at least this time it's not random whether or not that item level increase happens. These higher item level pieces are always guaranteed to drop at the higher item level, so it's not as bad as some systems we've seen in the past, like Titan Forging. In addition to the item levels being more staggered throughout the raid, we will actually see some huge changes to the overall loot system for raids, specifically in Dragonflight. As it stands right now, you will not be able to use personal loot inside a raid instance. It's going to be group loot only, which means a bunch of items are going to drop and everyone will get to see them, and you need to roll need, greed, disenchant, or pass on the items. That's going to be the only loot option available for raids. It's a bit of an odd change, but the major trade-off here is that all loot trading restrictions have been lifted, so if you need an item and win it, you can then trade that item to anyone else in the group. There are no item level restrictions or weird must-have tier at a certain level restrictions. You can just freely trade items once again, so as long as the player was part of the boss kill, you can trade around items as much as you want. Now instead of trading restrictions, we will see some rolling restrictions. You obviously won't be able to roll need on an item you can't use, so a cloth wearer can't roll need on a plate item, a mail wearer can't roll need on a leather item. You can only need on the armor your class actually wears. They're actually going one step further though and adding in main spec and off spec functionality. So while a rep paladin can roll need on a shield, if a tank also rolls need on that shield, the tank will automatically win. It's their main spec after all. But that off spec need roll from the rep paladin will take priority over anyone rolling greed. In addition to that, you won't be able to win the same item twice, so if two pieces of the same thing drop and you roll need on both, you will never actually win both. And you will also not be allowed to roll on an item if you are wearing the exact same piece of gear at the exact same item level, unless the new item drops with tertiary stats or a socket. So it's not exactly the same as the old need and greed system. It's going to be, or at least try to be, a lot smarter to try and reduce potential for trolling and griefing, but we'll just have to wait and see how it all pans out. Either way, group loot is going to be your only loot choice for raids in Dragonflight. And then the last change here, still on the topic of raids, is for BOE gear. BOE gear has always been kind of special because it's the only loot you can get from a raid that can be traded or sold to literally anyone outside of your raid. So the first change is that regular trash mobs will never have a chance to drop BOEs in Dragonflight, so the days of trash farming are probably over. Instead, named mini-bosses throughout the raid will have a chance to drop BOEs instead. The mini-bosses can also be killed only once per week, per difficulty, for loot, so you won't be able to endlessly farm BOEs with these changes in place. Apparently, BOE drops will also scale with group size, so the larger your group, the higher the chance of some BOEs dropping, even up to the point where you should be guaranteed to see some BOEs drop throughout the entire raid. They might also drop at higher item levels and have important items in the loot table. Honestly, I think this is a great way to handle BOEs, and I'm excited to see how many mini-bosses will be in the first tier. You know, everyone is going to want to kill every mini-boss they come across just for the potential of those massive loot drops. So, lots of changes for raid loot in general, but that's all of the lesser known features we think you should absolutely know about, so that's it for this video. How many things on this list did you not know before this video? Is there anything you think should be on this list that wasn't? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon and to everyone subscribed on Twitch. You can see the names floating by on screen. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another video. Thanks for watching, folks. Good luck and have fun, and as always, I will see you next time. Oh, and thanks again to NordVPN for sponsoring this video.